There's a card in cEDH that only costs 2 mana and has a near 100% play rate in the top tier black decks. It's been nerfed in Alchemy, it's hyper efficient, and when 2 players bring it to the table, the other 2 might as well just scoop. Welcome back to Deck Check. My name is Ganesh, and this is the case for banning Orcish Bowmasters. So Top Deck ran a survey from only real cEDH players, meaning accounts that had a minimum of 3 tournaments each, and a total of 1,643 players answered this question. What card or cards do you think are problematic for the game? So Bowmasters didn't just win, it wasn't even close, with about 50 more votes than the next highest card, Timna the Weaver. And here's why that matters. When a ton of the people that are most invested in this format hate one card, you can't just write that off as salt. Something must be fundamentally broken with the card. So let's break down exactly what that something is.
I want to give a huge shout out real quick to Tanner from Graveborn Games. He's done so much for the cEDH community, and it would be awesome if we could all show some support back. I'll have Graveborn linked below so you can check them out and give them the love they deserve. Also, don't miss the Crimson Lion tournament at the end of the month. Crimson always delivers top tier events, and you'll catch me there. That will also be linked below.
So this card offers you a crazy amount of value for very, very little cost. It's very hyper efficient. So for 2 mana, you get a creature with flash, and you just get immediate value out of it. So in cEDH, this is landing usually turn 1 or turn 2, and even if it doesn't really kill anything, and almost all of these it does kill something, it's going to make a token that turns on Timna, and that will potentially draw you 2 extra cards per turn cycle for kind of free. That is basically this card's floor. So, and that's really good on its own. Drawing 2 extra cards, making 2 bodies is just good, right? But here's what gets me. This card is already very strong in 1v1 formats. It sees play in decks and every format pretty much that it's legal in, and it's good there. It's good in all those formats. So now you take a card that's already good and you put it into multiplayer where there's 3 opponents instead of just 1, and it becomes a problem, and it's compounded by the fact that we can run these hyper draw engines in cEDH that you don't really get as much in other formats, and the draw engines feed each other and you just get this whole mess. So you pair it with an opponent's heuristic study, and every single draw trigger not only becomes value for the heuristic player, also becomes an Orcish ping, which means another creature off the board and another larger orc army, a little bit more life pressure, another resource swing. So it's crazy. The only cards that are even remotely as efficient as this card are Heuristic Study, Mystic Remora, Smothering Tide, Ad Nauseam, and Necropotence. And those are the 5 strongest possible cards we have in this format. I mean, not counting stuff like Thorgal and Breach. So that just kind of tells you how kind of busted this card really can be. So something else I want to mention is how difficult Bowmasters is to actually interact with. So since it's a creature, it doesn't actually get hit by most of the counter spells we commonly run in cEDH, like Flusterstorm, Swan Song, and say Force of Negation. On top of that, since it's a flash creature, one of the most common ways we have in cEDH of interacting with non-land permanents in general is bounce. And the reason we run a lot of cards like Into the Funmaw and Chain of Vapor is because these cards answer a very wide variety of threats. So something like Chain of Vapor can stop, say, if they're tied on mana, an Underworld Breach, and it can also get rid of someone's heuristic study for you. And Bowman is somewhat immune to these effects, like bounce effects, as long as the person controlling it has enough mana, right? So if they have, 2 extra mana, you go and you bounce their Bowman when you need to, they just spend 2 mana and recast again because it has flash. They can just put it out there whenever they want. The only real kind of solution to Bowman to get it off the board permanently is to exile it with a card like Source of Plowshares or Path to Exile. And those are 2 cards that aren't played as commonly anymore anyway. And on top of that, those cards themselves are actually not difficult to interact with, right? So if you have something like a Mental Misstep or any of the other suite of counterspells, you can stop it. So it kind of becomes a situation where it's a card that's very easy to get out, but very, very difficult to actually remove. And even if you do have the removal spell, the ETB trigger is still going to go off regardless of what happens, so they get a little bit of value out of the card no matter what happens as long as it resolves. So now there is a counterpoint kind of saying that Bowmaster is an interaction point, and it's very, very different in my opinion from just a regular like counterspell or like say Source to Plowshares or a bounce spell. It doesn't just deal with one thing. It just snowballs you into so much advantage. So let's say you kill a Mana Dork on turn 2, you're putting down a card and kind of a turn that you just stole from your opponent. In cEDH, where games are decided by like 1 or 2 mana a lot of times, is very, very backbreaking. And while those decks that you set back are being pushed down, you are getting more draws with your Orcs and your Tymnas and things. And on top of that, having the Bowmaster on the board means those creature decks cannot develop. Like if you have a Bowman on the board and you're thinking about playing a 1 health, maybe even 2 health creature, a lot of times you can't even do it, or you don't really want to invest into that because it's just going to die. Like what's the point of casting a Mana Dork if someone else has a Ristic on the board and the second anyone doesn't pay their trigger, your Mana Dork's going to die. And so it's just very, very low investment. It's hyper efficient. It's usually almost always relevant. And we haven't even mentioned like its absurd game-winning synergy with wheels. So if someone plays a wheel and you happen to have a Bowman, like you're probably winning that game, right? You're like dealing 20 damage to everybody and like clearing the board and stuff like that. So it's just really, really good. So here's the most frustrating part with this card. It doesn't actually check the most powerful decks at all. Bowmasters doesn't hurt the decks, it's life pressure kind of style thing it's supposed to stop. Like it's supposed to deal damage. You're supposed to get a big Orc army. You're supposed to start whacking people with combat damage, right? It's kind of the point of the card. It doesn't do that, right? So Blue Farm, Rog Si, anything Turbo Nas, like Tymna Dargo, they run some creatures, but they don't care about them. So one of Tymna Dargo's big things is they're sacking their Tymna Dargo. I mean, granted, you can ping the Rograk and stuff, right? But like a lot of times they just don't really care. Meanwhile, the other decks like Sisay, Thrasios, Magda, they just die from Bowman. Like they can't play the game. So the decks that are supposed to counterbalance the draw engines, like the Sisays and Thrasios and stuff. So the decks that are kind of supposed to get under the Ristics are the ones getting absolutely demolished. And the Ristic decks, so the ones that are decks are already very consistent at getting Ristic Study out, they're way stronger because many times what happens is if I have Ristic Study and another player has a Bowman, instead of pointing that Bowman damage at, say my face, which is not really relevant, most of the time they're going to take those pings and they're going to ping off other like 1/1s on the board because it's just more relevant to take someone else out of the game than it is to punish the player with the most advantage for like a couple health points, right? Not to mention that many times when a player has a Bowman, another player has a Ristic Study, sometimes people will intentionally feed into the Ristic Study, especially if there's a win attempt on the stack, just to get the Bowman triggers to kill someone else's board. So it's just like a completely backwards card. It just protects the strongest decks right now, and it just punishes the weaker ones to like an absolutely absurd extent. So a card is broken when even Rog Si, like a deck that doesn't really care about creatures at all, runs it. So Rog Si is a turbo list that like runs very, very, very few creatures. And if even they're running this creature that, in theory doesn't usually advance their main game plan, which is fast ad nauseum, fast necropotence, that should be telling you something. Now, I know that it does have good synergy with wheels, and that is one of the big reasons a lot of them keep it, but still, a lot of times when they're playing out Bowman, it's not always paired with the wheel, and it's still good, which is crazy to me. So now let's talk about my favorite nightmare scenario when 2 players have Orcish Bowmasters or when someone clones one. So in this scenario, neither player wants to go and ping the other Bowman because that kind of leaves the table down a Bowman, which they might not want. So what happens most of the time is both players keep them. They just say, hey, don't ping my Bowman. I won't ping your Bowman. And every other player at the table gets just completely locked out of creatures for pretty much for the rest of the game. The game just slows to a crawl. Nobody can commit to the board. You can't really play creatures into this. Like, what's the point of casting them, like triggering heuristics and stuff, if they just pretty much immediately die? Creature strategies become pretty much unplayable, and spell-based combos are pretty much the only way to win the game at that point. So if you've played enough cEDH, you've probably lived through this. It's not fun, it's not interactive, and it's kind of like mutually absurd destruction where only the creature-based decks die. Let's talk about game flow. So a lot of people are talking about wanting to ban Rhystic because of its problem with triggers, where you stop on each trigger, you think about who you want to pay for, how many cards they have, and people are negotiating with you on whether or not to pay the one. With Bowman, this is even worse because Bowman also triggers off these Rhystics, and every Rhystic trigger and Bowman trigger kind of becomes this negotiation, right? So if like one player has a few creatures, another player has another few creatures, every single Bowman ping, you're going to have two people, arguing over whether or not like you should do this. And it's not like other removal spells where, usually you just use a removal spell when there's like a win on the stack, or like, you want to get rid of something really problematic, like some sort of stacks piece. And generally there isn't like too much crazy negotiation about that. Like if someone's winning, you have to stop them. Bowman's very different in that you are constantly getting pings. So it's not like you're sitting there waiting for like some sort of like tactical strike. It's more like you just have a bunch of free damage that you pay nothing for, no mana for, and you have to kind of negotiate with people every single time that this comes up. Is really annoying. And all of this discussion, all of this eats into the clock. So yeah, when you multiply this out by like 3 opponents, you have all these decision trees, and this Bowman is one of the big reasons games go to draws. It's because it's killing all these like little value pieces, and when you do that, it makes it pretty much impossible for any creature-based deck to actually close out the game. One of the worst parts about Bowman is it doesn't actually stop the strongest creatures in our format. So yeah, it's really good about killing, the random mana dork or, this random 1 health creature, but it doesn't do anything to Grand Abolisher, Ranger Captain, Thassa's Oracle, Voice of Victory, like all these like really, really powerful creatures that it's supposed to, in theory it should interact with in some way. It doesn't do that. So, if someone casts a Grand Abolisher and you have a Bowman on the board, you're just dead. Like that's the game's over. Even though Grand Abolisher is a creature, and hopefully, an anti-creature card should be able to deal with that, it just doesn't. Right? It doesn't do anything to Thassa's Oracle either, because if Thassa's Oracle dies and you have your library exiled, you still win the game, right? So Bowman's really just kind of this weird gatekeeper that only stops the more fair decks from competing, basically. So I want to talk a little bit about what the format was like before Bowman got printed. So one of the examples I want to give is before Orcish Bowmasters was printed, Blue Farm ran Toxic Deluge. I know this because I personally was on the card before Bowman got printed, and then there's a period of time where I think I was on both cards, and then eventually I just cut board wipes from my list because I didn't need it. Like I just had Bowman, and it was just so good that I usually don't even need a board wipe. Now, one of the problems with this is when you run a board wipe like Toxic Deluge or Blasphemous Act or whatever, board wipes are symmetrical. So you're losing your stuff, and your opponents are losing their stuff, and in that sense, it's semi-fair. Granted, I know there's a lot of situations where the person casting the board wipe doesn't have any creatures; they have other forms of value, but still, right? Now we don't need it. Like as farm or other decks, we don't really need wipes as much, because if we just have Bowman, we have cheap, one-sided, repeatable board control that just gets, better as the game goes on, as there's more draw engines on the board, as people are drawing more and more cards. So when one card lets an entire archetype of decks just change its removal suite, I don't think that's really healthy interaction. It's just format warping. So I want to go over some of the kind of counter arguments to maybe banning Bowman and just give my thoughts on them. So one of the big ones is, wouldn't it make like green decks too strong? And the answer to that is just no, it wouldn't. Green decks weren't the strongest available strategy before the Bowman printing, and it wouldn't be with Bowman gone anyway. Like, it would help if Bowman were gone, but by no means would, Kinnan or, TNT or Rog Si immediately become the best deck, because the tools available to the other styles of decks are just so much more powerful. And again, another argument is that it's supposed to put Farm and Rog Si in check, which it doesn't, of course. Kill a couple of their value creatures and that sort of thing, but they run the card themselves, like they are the problem. So it really helps them more than it hurts them in this format. The other argument you could kind of make against banning Bowman is that it's not a win condition, it's just a kind of removal piece. That's true, but it's more of kind of like a gatekeeper that decides who's allowed to play the game in cEDH games, and sometimes it's really even worse. So here's where we are. It's a card that's too efficient, hyper efficient. It punishes the wrong decks. It makes games take longer and, in my opinion, less fun. It's already nerfed in other formats, and is pretty much hated by a lot of cEDH players. So the question isn't really whether Bowman is powerful. The question is, does it make cEDH better or worse? And I know my answer. What's yours? Drop it in the comments, especially if you've been stuck in a Bowmaster Cold War. I want to hear your horror stories. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, may your draws be plentiful and your opponent's Bowmasters stay in
exile.